Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and hello. Today I want to speak about interest and why it's prohibited in all major religions and why the holy books speak against it. Basically, interest is exploitation of the need of a person, and what basically ends up happening is that a person in need, either because he doesn't have enough to consume and he needs monetary assistance to buy food, water, and shelter, or a person who wants to further invest in a business. A person is well off but he needs money to invest in a business and he'll go and borrow. So basically what happens is that when a person borrows money from another person who's well off or an institution, then they rent the money to him. They tell him, okay, you can keep that money, but we have to get that money back plus an additional percentage of that money. And usually that the interest compounds and increases over time. So the way this is exploitation is that everybody can relate that if you're in need, if you have a flat tire, you're on the side of the road, and somebody stops by, a good citizen stops by, and he's like, all right, I can help you out. You can call 911 with my phone, but you have to pay me $10. You're like, I'll just wait for the next guy to come and help me out. You understand? Or somebody's hungry, somebody's homeless, and you're basically preying off of his need, or else he would have never came to ask you for a loan. So basically, it's not ethical. We can at least agree with that it's not ethical to prey on somebody's need, to misuse the need of somebody and tell them, look, I'm gonna give you this money, but you need to pay me back. And then in the other aspect of it is that if a business takes a loan to invest further, then every business has, no matter how profitable it is, every business has to deal with risk. Something can happen. There's political situations that can happen. There's supply, demand, all these market factors that can cause the business to flop. So basically every business is faced with risk, but the person who lends the money to the business, he or she, they don't face any risk, because the interest is a fixed percentage. A fixed percentage has to be given to them no matter what happens to the business. Or if a person wants to buy a house, and then no matter if he loses his job and he's not able to make payments, and then he's not able to keep that house, so they'll take the house away from him. And basically it's exploitation of their need, and they're not equally sharing the risk. So it's like the most profitable business. And what ends up happening is that surplus money is given out in loans usually, right? And surplus money is held by a very limited class of society, and the majority of the society is in the receiving end of this business, right? And a small minority of society actually profits or benefits from this business. And even if you want to talk about if you deposit your money in a bank and you get a percentage of return on that, that's very, very limited compared to the return that the person who invested your money is getting on that money, right? So the point is that it's unfair, it's unethical, right? That's one aspect of it. But then there's huge macroeconomic effects that affect the whole society basically. And an easy way to understand this is that basically it leads to inflation. It leads to devaluation of the medium of exchange, and it leads to basically now you have to pay back that amount, and then a person will resort to anything to pay it back. And it's called creation of money. That's how it's termed. Interest, loans, and the return on loan is called creation of money. And to understand this concept of creation of money, basically there are only limited resources in the world, right? and those resources are mined, gold, for example, or crops. They come out at a specific rate. Then it's not an exponential rate, but basically that's the value. These items have value, and these items of value, they're limited, they're restricted, they're rare. And money as we have it now is a medium of exchange. It's not part of those items. It's not like, for example, back in the days they had gold, and gold was part of the items that were extracted, and gold is limited, and it being limited in itself kind of kept that value of it alive. But now money is has no intrinsic value, has no value in itself. And basically, when you have a limited amount of resources, and the medium of exchange used for those resources, if it keeps on multiplying, right? It's like you have musical chairs. Musical chairs is a little game where there's like 10 chairs and there's 11 participants. And no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard they try, one participant will not be able to sit on a chair because there's only physically 10 chairs. There are only 10 chairs and there's 11 people. So just like that, the resources are limited, but the money in supply, the money in creation, because of lending money without any asset to support it, right? And then when you lend money that has no asset to support it, and the interest that comes on that loan basically keeps on creating money. So the reality of the world today is that only 20% of the money supply of the entire world, or less, 20% of less, is actually physically present with us. Basically, it's even in paper form, and that paper form is not even backed by gold, right? That also is like, that 20% is, to a very limited extent, is backed by gold, because gold is limited and the money supply has far exceeded the amount that, and it has devalued. There was the 1944 Bretton Woods Accords. You can Google that, and they had the countries of the world had signed the agreement that they will back it by gold, but then they ended up not being able to keep up with that agreement because the money supply exceeded. And basically what happens, the reason why money supply exceeds, is that if you think about it in easy terms, look, what used to happen was there were goldsmiths, and these goldsmith people used to come and keep their gold by them for safekeeping, right? And because it was really difficult to carry gold. Gold was heavy and it could get robbed. So what ended up happening is that they would keep the gold for the person, and they would issue generic receipts for the amount of gold they have, so that people could trade those receipts. So I could give my receipt that was worth 10 ounces of gold, for example, to another person in exchange for something. So the receipt itself is a piece of paper. It has no intrinsic value of itself, but that receipt stands for something, that this much gold is by the goldsmith, and I can go anytime and cash that receipt, basically, so to say. And I could just take that receipt with me and trade that for food, or trade that for whatever I wanted. But what ended up happening is that now these goldsmiths noticed that the gold they have with them, it never occurs that 100% of it is withdrawn, right? There's always some amount of gold that remains with them, because somebody didn't withdraw yet, or people sometimes they never withdraw. They keep the gold there and just they continue to deal with the checks. So they said, look, why not lend this gold, right? Or why not write more checks? Before they started lending that gold, which was not theirs, there was a 1-to-1 ratio. You could gather all the receipts that are out there in the world, and they would have an equal backing of gold to them. But when they started lending now, then these goldsmiths used to make money off of safekeeping the gold. But they said, why not increase our profit, right? That's where the human greed comes in, right? They said, why not increase our profit? Why not make money by two ways? One, by safekeeping the gold, and second, by lending the gold out for interest, basically. And we lend the gold out, and then we get a return on the amount that we lend out. So then they started writing more receipts to people who needed the money in return for interest. And what ended up happening was that, for example, there was only 10 pounds of gold they had, but the receipts in circulation were 15 pounds of gold. And now on those 5 pounds extra, there was interest that you had to pay back, right? You had to pay back 5% or 10%, which compounded, which increased over time. So basically, slowly, the money supply grew a lot more than what that supply was worth, and it ended up in inflation. It's a huge bubble. So before, in 1944 till 1970s, the gold was, the currency, the contemporary currency was backed by gold. Then they said, all right, let's leave it alone, and they pegged the currency on the US dollar. And so majority of the currencies of the world are pegged on the US dollar. And the US dollar was supposed to be pegged onto the gold, but it's not. So it's this huge bubble. It's this huge, like, unstable bubble. And the money supply continues to increase because commercial banks, they continue to give out loans. And the loans they give out are obviously in excess of what they have with them. And then the loans, their interest rates on those loans. So then, the money supply increases without money to back it up. And then there's this huge, it's like a huge mess type of thing. And how does inflation happen? For example, I want, back in the days, if I bought my house for like, or I bought a car, or not, let's take the example of a house because it's more, it stays longer. So I have a house for $1,000, or $20,000. I bought a house for $20,000. Now, if I want to borrow from the bank to buy that house, I'm gonna have to pay back the bank, a lot more than I borrowed. Let's say, I had to pay back the bank, $30,000. Now, when I sell that house, I'm not gonna sell it for, 30,000. I'm gonna sell it for a profit. I'm gonna sell it for 45. I'm gonna sell it for 40,000. Now, the house is in the market now for 40,000. And when somebody wants to buy that house, they'll borrow money, $40,000, to buy that house. And over the course of 30 years, when they pay off the loan, because of the interest rate that's attached to that loan, they'll pay off about $50,000 to the bank for the $40,000 house. And then when they sell that house now that they paid $50,000 for, they'll sell it for a profit. And then this will keep on increasing. And then basically what will end up happening is that house, which was worth a little bit, 100 years down the road, it will be, the value of that house will be the same, but then the money that will be exchanged for that house, the value of that money will decrease because you had to have a lot more of that money for the same commodity. So basically, it harms the economy. It's unethical, right? And it's oppression. Basically, you're preying off of the need of somebody else, and because of that musical chairs thing, that there's only that limited supply of asset available, somebody will default. Default meaning that somebody will not be able to pay. If 11 people buy houses, 10 people will be able to pay back, and one person will not be able to pay because that money is not in existence. You get it? That money doesn't exist. There's nothing to back it up. And just like there's 10 chairs, 10 musical chairs, and people are playing, no matter how hard they all try, one person will not be able to sit on that chair, right? And then people, they have to think about it. They buy houses on loans, they buy cars on loans. There's a credit society now. I have a credit card and I go and I swipe it all over the place. And then people, they have to end up taking loans to pay back the loan. And then sometimes it's so bad that just to pay back the interest on the loans, I have to take loans. And then the loan I took has also interest rate attached to it. So basically, it's an unending circle of debt that just keeps on sinking a man lower and lower until he basically is owned by the person who he owes money to. So it's not right. It's unethical. And what's the alternative? The alternative is that a person invests. He becomes a partner in business. You help somebody for free. And if you want to profit off of helping him, you partner with him in business, right? You say that, all right, I'll invest in your business, but I'll have a share of your profit, a percentage of your profit, not a fixed amount, right? Because a percentage, look, if he makes only $10 this year, I'll have 5% of it, right? And if he makes $1 million this year, I'll still have 5% of it. So it's a more balanced method, right? And it's more recommended, and that's the way that the Holy Scriptures recommend it. So I hope that that gave us a little bit of insight on why interest is harmful for society, and why it's prohibited in the religions, and how people are directly harmed by it. Also, one last thing that came to mind is that people, when they want to loan money, they just look at the institutions, or people in upper class society that loan money to the people that are in need. They just look at credibility. They look at the fact that, can this guy pay me back or not? But if a person looks at investment, he will look at how likely is this business or is this transaction to produce profit, and how likely am I to get a higher share of profit. So interest will not, those businesses won't necessarily be invested into, or those people won't be invested into, and the money won't reach those with the ideas. It will just reach those with a stable job, or those that are able to pay back. As opposed to, if I want to profit share, or if I want to be partners with a person in his business, I will look at his profitability. I will look at how much return will I make on the 5% of profit. How likely is this business to succeed, right? And in interest, I will look at how likely is he to default, because if he defaults, I can keep his house as well, right? The house he bought, so the money he paid me, and plus the house. So basically, it's a clash of interests. Over here, if you profit share, or the other solutions that there are, the alternatives to interest, you basically have the same interest, the same, and on this side there's a clash of interest, that you want him to default, basically, it's going to benefit you if he defaults, and it's going to benefit him if he pays back on time. And then there's even a fee for paying back on time, because the bank didn't get the interest that it wanted. It just got the same money, so they charge you a fee for paying back on time. So there's gonna be more to come. These were just a few things that I had on top of my mind, and peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.